Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. The press says the United Kingdom is having a freak October heatwave caused by the burning of fossil fuels. Temperatures in London are forecast to soar up to 66 degrees Fahrenheit this week. That doesn't sound like much of a heatwave, but in October 1921, London had an actual heatwave. During October 1921, London had 4 days over 80 degrees Fahrenheit, peaking at 84 degrees. Peak temperatures in London in October 1921 were 18 degrees warmer than this year. The Graphic newspaper in London wrote about the heatwave. In the Northern Hemisphere, this abnormal weather is universal. In eastern Russia, it has caused a colossal tragedy. And they went on to explain that the extended heatwave and drought was caused by solar activity. The October heatwave in London and Paris was described as phenomenal. But the heatwave wasn't just in October. It actually lasted for most of the year. In September, the New York Herald reported death for millions in 1921's record heatwave. Millions of people were starving in Eastern Europe, Russia, and Asia. And they showed that Switzerland's Lake Morat had dried up. But today that same lake in Switzerland is full of water and the surrounding countryside is very green. The New York Times reported a worldwide heatwave of unusual length and intensity. They said there were 2 million Koreans starving in Manchuria owing to drought-ruined crops. Drought kills fish in River Seine, and France suffers most severe drought in 47 years. In the United States, 1921 was the second hottest year on record after 1934. More than two-thirds of afternoon temperature readings in the United States during 1921 were over 60 degrees Fahrenheit. In the United States, 1921 had the most extended warmth of any year since 1895. The heat and drought of 1921 was associated with a large solar storm on May 14th and 15th. As a result of that storm, the aurora borealis was seen as far south as the Mexico border. Shortly after that storm, one of the deadliest floods in U.S. history struck Pueblo, Colorado. As many as 1,500 people were killed in that Arkansas River flood of 1921. The press widely accepted that the extreme weather of 1921 was caused by solar activity. Science and our worldwide upset weather. The astonishing theory that the disastrous heat and drought of the summer were due to our solar system passing through a vast unseen cosmic cloud at a time when sunspots were hottest. The hot weather of 1921 extended up into the Arctic. The U.S. Weather Bureau reported a radical change in Arctic climatic conditions and hitherto unheard of high temperatures in that part of the Earth's surface. Many old landmarks are so changed as to be unrecognizable. Where formerly great masses of ice were found, there are now often moraines, accumulations of earth and stones. At many points where glaciers formerly extended far into the sea, they have entirely disappeared. During the winter of 1921-1922, the ocean did not freeze over even on the north coast of Spitsbergen. Strange things happening in the frozen Arctic. Is the North Pole going to melt? Formerly, the waters about Spitsbergen have held an even summer temperature in the neighborhood of 5 degrees above freezing. This year it rose as high as 28 degrees. Last winter, the ocean did not freeze over even on the north coast of Spitsbergen. This map showed that there was no ice around Spitsbergen all winter. There was no ice around Spitsbergen during the winter of 1921, but this year there was lots of ice. Explorer Stephenson reported that the ice between the North Pole and Alaska was young, thin, moving, rotten ice. The glaciers in Glacier National Park were melting so quickly at that time, experts predicted they would be gone by 1950. But those glaciers are still there and have actually grown over the last 30 years. It was the same story with glaciers in Europe. Glaciers in Norway were retreating very rapidly at that time. This is 1869, 1933, and 1946. Arctic temperatures were warming very rapidly and glaciers were retreating very rapidly as well. All evidence shows that 1921 was a very warm year around the world and was the second hottest year on record in the United States. But NASA shows that 1921 was one of the coldest years on record. So according to NASA, glaciers melt very rapidly when it's cold and they expand when temperatures are much warmer. Ice doesn't lie, but government climate scientists do. And Michael Mann's fraudulent hockey stick shows exactly the same thing, that 1921 was very cold. This graph is the official disinformation of the United Nations. Now let's take a look at how governments created these fraudulent temperature graphs. In 1989, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reported this. Analysis of warming since 1881 shows most of the temperature increase in global temperature happened before 1919, before the more recent sharp rise in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. While global climate warmed overall since 1881, it actually cooled from 1921 to 1979. In 1989, the U.S. government made it clear that the small amount of warming which had occurred had nothing to do with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. They said most of the warming occurred between 1881 and 1919, and that Earth had cooled from 1921 to 1979. But NOAA has since altered their data and now shows cooling from 1881 to 1919. And they now show warming from 1921 to 1979. This is the exact opposite of what they said in 1989. Now I'm going to show you how this data tampering was done. This map from NOAA shows where they have daily temperature data from the years 1891 to 1920. The vast majority of the high-quality temperature data from that time period is in the United States, with some in Europe and parts of Australia. They have almost no daily temperature data for the Arctic, the Antarctic, Asia, Africa, or South America. So the U.S. temperature data is critically important because that's where most of their high-quality data is located. As I showed earlier, the two hottest years in the United States were 1934 and 1921. But before NOAA releases their temperature graphs to the public, they make massive alterations to the data. The purple line shows the actual thermometer data, but the red line shows the graphs which NOAA releases to the public. The U.S. government massively adjusts older temperatures downwards while increasing recent temperatures. This graph shows the adjustments being made. Older temperatures are adjusted downwards by almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit, and recent temperatures are adjusted upwards by almost 1 degree Fahrenheit. This is the real hockey stick. It's a hockey stick of data tampering by the U.S. government. Now let's look at a very similar graph. This is a graph of the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now let's look at the two graphs side by side. The graph on the left is the adjustments being made to temperature data, and the graph on the right is the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The two graphs are nearly identical, and this tells us something very important. The data is being altered to match the theory that carbon dioxide controls the temperature. This graph plots atmospheric carbon dioxide on the x-axis and the adjustments being made to the temperature data on the y-axis. It's easy to see what's going on. The data is being altered to match their failed theory. Actual scientists would change their theory to match the data, but government climate scientists do the opposite. They alter the data to match their theory. What they're doing is committing one of the biggest frauds in scientific history. This fraud forms the basis of the blade of Michael Mann's hockey stick. This fraud forms the basis of NASA's global temperature record. And the press are full participants in this fraud. They say that 66 degrees Fahrenheit in London in October is a heat wave, when London was almost 20 degrees warmer during October a century ago. Toto's been pulling back the curtain on this scam for the past 14 years. You can visit him, Kyrie, Caesar, Toki, and Upala on the web at realclimatescience.com.